Hi everybody, it's been a full week now since the end of the first season of the Orville, and I wanted to take a moment here and kind of look back and talk about my thoughts now that it had time to sort of digest and think back on the first season now that it's complete. I do have a little bit of a cold, so I'm sorry if you can hear that in my voice at all compared to my other episodes about the Orville. I have to say that, especially now, having the time to look back and rewatch some episodes and really think about it, I come away very impressed and really in love with the way this show turned out and what it became by the end of its first season. Going into it, I had mixed hopes, and I think the show, even as it started its run, had very mixed emotions and mixed impressions and mixed opinions regarding what the show actually was going to be. I think it seemed very much from the previews and the way it was promoted by Fox and things, I think the general consensus, what a lot of people thought it was going to be, myself included, was something very Red Dwarf or something closer to maybe Galaxy Quest, something that direction, maybe with a little more Family Guy-ish humor thanks to Seth's involvement. But it's not really where it went. There's definitely a lot of that. It's a great comedic series, and that's one of my favorite elements. I think it works really well because the characters are done so well that a lot of the comedy works. But I liked how, especially as the show went along, in many cases it became some good, just general science fiction that had a lot of great comedic leanings, rather than it being a all-out comedy series. It wasn't, like Tripping the Rift or something like that. It was definitely just, it felt in many ways, sometimes like the original Star Trek, sometimes like Next Generation. It definitely had a lot of elements that were more in that area, just with a more comedic twist to it that I think really helped make it its own thing. And it's something where you can, again, make so many comparisons to Star Trek, and me coming from that fandom growing up, I really got into the show very early on because of those elements, and that's why I mention them so frequently. But I do have to say that outside of those elements, it is its own thing, and it does its own thing very, very well, and it stands on its own. It stands, above just being something that is an homage to something else. It really stands out as its own thing that also has lots of familiar elements of some of the best of some sci-fi of the past. So I think it really, really works and stands on its own legs, and I think it had a very successful first season. And it's just so strange that the crazy divide between critics and general audiences based on the Orville, and how it's a total flip side of Discovery, that critics for some reason love that travesty, and people are a little more divided on it, versus the Orville, which has great fan support and people in general really, really like it, and the critics just can't get it for some reason. It's very, very strange. So the last thing I wanted to do here was talk about some of my favorite characters and go through each season 1 episode and talk about, list my favorites from least favorite to favorite episode of the season. Definitely, I think this show, during its run, did an incredible job of making an ensemble cast, which I really, really liked. It wasn't just a focus on Captain Ed Mercer, which I thought it was going to be going into it. It wasn't that at all. And there were a handful of episodes where you got sort of an Alara episode, you got a Bortus episode, that type of thing, where it really highlighted a lot of different characters. Kelly, everyone sort of got their own chance to shine, and it really made every character feel more believable, gave them a little more depth, and made the relationships really stand out between the different characters. Coming out of it, though, at the end of the first season, even some characters that I didn't quite like as much in the beginning, I ended up liking by the end. This is it's very unique in that I really enjoy most of the characters, some more than others. I think coming out of it, Alara and Dr. Claire Finn are probably my two favorites at the end. There really weren't any characters, even people like Yaphet, who I wasn't too fond of in the beginning, really grew on me. Everyone just very, very much grew on me as the series went along. And this is a very rare case where even my least favorite episode of the season, I still really enjoyed. This is a rare case where I don't think there really was a truly weak episode. There were some that were stronger than others, both just looking at it critically and both just personal taste, which was a very different take. In both cases, I think there were some that were better than others, but it's very rare, particularly with a sci-fi series where there's so much more to kind of work out as far as the kinks, as far as makeup and tone, and really getting the balance right in so many respects. In sci-fi shows, there was always a handful of episodes that first season. In majority of the cases, Farscape's one that stands out to where I think they've had a very, very strong first season, but usually a first season's fairly weak in comparison to later seasons if it loads on. But yeah, there was not a single episode of this season that I can say that I disliked. In saying that, going through here, my least favorite episode was actually the premiere, Old Wounds, which I very, very much enjoyed, but at the same time, I think it got the balance of the humor and the drama and the action. It's so much better as the season went along. I think there was such a stark difference between the premiere and how well everything blended together so smoothly as the show went on, that even though I really enjoyed that episode and have watched it a couple times, again, saying there's nothing I dislike about this first season, it is my least favorite overall. Next would be one of just a handful of cases where I think my personal taste goes against a large part of the fandom as far as the majority of people really enjoying a particular episode. My next, as far as least favorite, would be Majority Rule, episode 7, which seems to be one of the fan favorites, seems to be a top 5 for most people. And again, I really enjoyed this episode, but I did have a couple of problems with it, and it is one that I think I've seen a very similar take done just as well, if not better, multiple times before, to where I think this one, in comparison to some other ones, didn't quite do enough to stand on its own legs for me. I think viewed in isolation, just viewed in a vacuum, not really looking at other sci-fi, I think it's a tremendous episode, but I think looking on the larger scale, I think it's one of the weaker ones of the season. Still, again, I really enjoyed it. Next would be episode 4, If the Stars Should Appear. I really like that one. The next one is one that fell as the season went on, as far as being one of my favorites to one of my least favorites, episode 2, Command Performance. And you'll see later on why. But as far as a mostly like a Lara focused episode, I think another one later in the season did a much better job. And this one, as much as I enjoyed it, it did fall down. There were so many that came along as the season went on that I liked just a little bit better. This is one that I think a similar take has been done so much better later on in the season. Next is episode 5, Priya, which I think was just a great, fun sci-fi episode that kind of comes in the middle of the pack for me. Next is episode 3, About a Girl. I really, really enjoyed that episode, and I think what I liked about it, even though it had a handful of little stumbling blocks, a little bit of imperfections with how certain parts of it were handled, I think overall it came out as a very good science fiction story, and being only the 3rd episode in, I think it really solidified for me that this was going to be more than just a fun comedy. It was going to have a lot of substance and storytelling, and I think this really generated a lot of conversation and gave the show a lot of attention early on. Moving into my top 5 episodes of the season, number 11, New Dimensions. I really, really enjoyed that one, and that was pretty close with my next episode, my 4th favorite, number 6, Krill. Those two are pretty much a tie, I think, overall. I really enjoyed them for very different reasons, but those kind of round out the bottom of my top 5. And then my top 3 pretty much stand alone. These I really, really enjoyed, and definitely gets into personal taste here with my 3rd favorite episode, which doesn't seem to be quite as much of a fan favorite, episode 8, Into the Fold. And there's definitely just a personal attachment from being a massive Deep Space Nine fan, of course. Going into it, I automatically was like, alright, I'm gonna like Penny Johnson-Gerald here. And I really did enjoy her, and I really love Isaac as sort of the straight man. I really like that dynamic, and I love the family dynamic and the interpersonal relationships between characters in sci-fi. It's one of my favorite things, and this worked really well for me in that regard, so I really enjoyed it. And actually, Mad Adultery, number 12, the end of the season here, became my 2nd favorite of the season. I just really, really enjoyed that episode, and especially going back and rewatching it a second time after I did my review and everything, it really solidified that as being my 2nd favorite of the season. But my favorite overall, one that I just found to be such just pure fun and action and creativity, I really loved episode 10, Firestorm, and that's part of why Command Performance sunk a little bit, because I really think both of those, while they do have some other great B storylines and things like that, they are both kind of Alara focused episodes, and I think this one is so much better. And her being one of my top 2 favorite characters, this I think was the best episode with her in it. I really enjoyed her performance. I enjoyed everything, the creativity, the special effects, just the humor, everything worked so perfectly for me in Firestorm. Objectively, I might not consider it the absolute best of the season, definitely one of the best, but as far as just being my personal favorites, episode 10, Firestorm, was my favorite. And just kind of wrapping up this discussion here, I really enjoyed the Orville, and I'm amazed that even the episodes that are some of my least favorites, I still really, really enjoyed. And it is so rare to have a show come out where you go into it so uncertain and it really turns out to be something different than what I thought it was going to be going in here, that I ended up liking every episode of the season. That's such a great start, and I'm glad that it has such, not just an active fandom, but it really seems to have very wide appeal as far as the type of people who are enjoying the show. Some people who are long-time Star Trek fans, some people that are just kind of general science fiction fans, different age ranges, people that aren't even really into science fiction. I'm finding there's some people that are enjoying the Orville, that this is really one of the few science fiction programs they enjoy. I think it has such a wide appeal that I could see a second season doing really, really well if they keep up this quality, and I'm super impressed, and I'm super happy to have the Orville on TV. I'm actually watching a current TV show, and that's such a rare thing.